Once this methylene blue gets into the mitochondria, it works very well to enhance the overall energy of your entire body and your vitality by about 30%. And it's also a mood uplifter across the board. Most people feel the difference. A lot of cancers have been shown in research to be inhibited by melatonin. They've looked at chemotherapy and radiation therapy. There seems to be such a benefit to taking melatonin and higher doses of melatonin, in fact, like we've been talking about.
I'm Dr. Esra Çavuşoğlu, and I've been living a sober life for the past 18 years. My battle with addiction drove me to seek new methods, devices, and supplements to improve my physical and mental performance, enhance my quality of life, and ultimately live healthier for longer. From my experiences in addiction recovery, biohacking, and longevity to the latest global developments, from groundbreaking entrepreneurs to expert academics, the conversations I've had over the years are now featured weekly on Soberhead Podcast. Welcome to Soberhead Podcast. I'm thrilled to finally sit down with Dr. John Lieurance, a leading expert on two dynamic molecules that could seriously upgrade your health, methylene blue and melatonin. What is so special about them? Methylene blue can supercharge the engine of your cells, mitochondria, boosting energy production by up to 30% while also supporting your immune system and lifting your mood. Meanwhile, melatonin isn't just for better sleep. It is a potent antioxidant. It reduces inflammation and can even protect your brain against everyday stress and environmental toxins. In today's conversation, Dr. Lieurance unpacks the science behind these powerhouse compounds, debunks common myths about high-dose usage, and shares how to safely incorporate them into your daily routine. If you're curious about taking your energy, sleep, and overall wellness to the next level, you won't want to miss a second of this. Our host for this episode is DABCN, the space, community, and platform where creatives, experts, and entrepreneurs come together at the meeting point of continents, the Bosphorus. Follow the link in the show notes for more information about events and membership. I'd like to thank Gedik University and Gedik Foundation for their trust in Soberhead Podcast. With their support, it is possible for us to bring you this content at this quality for absolutely free. And of course, every single one who has subscribed to this channel. However, a huge amount of people who watch Soberhead frequently are not subscribed. So, I will ask you for a quick favor. Hit that subscribe button now, because when you subscribe, it helps us make the show better and provides better access to the world-leading experts. Subscribe and share if you like. And I promise to continue to bring you a better Soberhead every day. Welcome to Soberhead Podcast, Dr. John Lieurance. Finally, this is the third time we're trying, and here we are.
Yes, thank you for having me, Ezra.
Yeah, I really wanted to talk with you because I consider you one of the most important authorities, if not the most important authority on methylene blue and melatonin. So I had to be patient and wait until you were able to make time for me. We tried many times, but finally we're doing it.
Good things are worth waiting for, and
absolutely.
I'm very happy that I'm here today and above ground and able to be on this podcast with you and share some of the most interesting things I find is these two molecules, melatonin and methylene blue.
Yeah, I want to make two parts in this podcast. One is I would love to talk about methylene blue, and the other one is actually melatonin. The reason I picked two, because you have so many other things. You do stem cells, you definitely are very much into red light therapies, any light therapies actually.
Yes.
I don't even know how to explain this thing that you put in the balloon in the nose, but craniosacral.
Endonasal cranial, yeah.
You do psychedelic facilitations, I guess, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
So you have a full spectrum clinic out in Sarasota, Florida.
Yes,
The reason I picked these two starts with my own story because actually, I spoke with you a little bit about that when we were in Helsinki. It's been a couple of years, maybe 5 years. When I heard about methylene blue, I was still living in New York. When I was reading the contradictions, it was clearly saying that if you're using an SSRI, that's dangerous. I called the company back then, and they say, yeah, well, do not use it, and they pull back the order. And that got stuck like that. And until I saw you, I was afraid to touch it. And then the second thing is melatonin, because yet again, it was told to me that I was taking melatonin. They say like, hey, your melatonin level is like lingering all day long. You have no reason to take extra melatonin. And plus, it's messing up with your thyroid levels. I was taking thyroid medication, still do. So these two, therefore, for a while, I kept myself away from them until I honestly started listening to your talks. And I'm like, okay, so these are not some things that I should be afraid of. If anything, it's going to help me. So which one would you like to start with?
We can start with methylene blue, if that's fine with you.
Sure, of course. I would love that. So what is methylene blue?
It's a brilliant blue salt. And it, if you think about the way colors work, is colors absorb everything else and they reflect what you see, right? So if we see blue, the opposite of blue is red. And so we know there's an absorption of red. Before it was discovered to be such an amazing medicine, it was used as a dye, staining and microscopy, and where they would dissect things, and biology where they'll look at cellular, because you can see things outlined because the way that the blue absorbs in certain cells more than others. It helps you to distinguish, different tissues and nerves. So mitochondria, we should probably just quickly, point out they're considered the powerhouse of the cell. And the mitochondria are doing a process called the electron transport chain, where they're moving electrons, and the act of moving these electrons within the mitochondria produces heat. And so the body harnesses that heat, and it makes something called ATP, and that's the fuel that helps to support energy in all of our cells. And we couldn't even live for even a nanosecond without this. And it's so amazing. Like, there's tiny little rotors in the mitochondria that spin at almost 10,000. I think it's like 8 to 9,000 a second.
Wow.
Per second they spin. It works through electrons, but at the very end of that chain of moving those electrons, there's a step that is called the cytochrome C, and cytochrome, cyto meaning cell and chrome meaning light. This cytochrome C is the step that can either use light, or which photons, or it can use electrons, which is physical matter, because photons is, there's nothing there. It's just a unit of energy. It's a wave, right? And some discussing like quantum mechanics would even say that even within the electron, when you look at actually finding matter, the smaller you get, it becomes questionable there as well. But the beautiful thing is that the body, and at a cellular level, we can utilize these lights, or the photon, and the primary lights that our cells can use for energy are red and near infrared, because these two have a tendency to actually get past your skin and get into your body. Most other spectrums, the skin is designed to protect us from the sun. Like blue, for instance, it doesn't even get past even 1 millimeter of skin, where these other wavelengths with the red and the near infrared, they're very high in the sun. There's a high amount of these photons, and our body uses those quite nicely to make energy. And so the methylene blue has been found to do so many things. And I know I'm kind of starting on this aspect of light, and the topic is called photobiomodulation. And so if anybody wanted to take a really deep dive into this subject, that's what you'd type into the computer, is photobiomodulation. And so that's the modulation of biology. And this is very practical in medicine. We use photobiomodulation in medicine quite a bit with lasers. Therapeutic lasers have been used in clinical physical therapists and chiropractic offices, and a lot of acupuncturists will use them to activate, because you can actually activate acupuncture points with a laser quite nicely. We started using laser therapy to regenerate the inner ear about 12 years ago. In fact, it was a doctor in Germany that I studied with, and this process is called LumaMed. And I know there's some LumaMed centers that are there in Europe. Probably a lot of the people listening to this, would they be primarily in Europe, would you say,
Yeah.
Ezra?
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is something really interesting to look at for tinnitus or hearing loss. You can go on and see lumamed.com.
What's the name of that doctor?
His name is Amen Kaiser. He's in Baden-Baden.
There was this German doctor. He was presenting at Health Hope Summit before A4M. They had these red lights. So we were talking about methylene blue, and then you jump into the red light, which is great.
You're talking about Dr. Weber.
Weber, yeah.
So back in the late 1800s, there was a doctor that was studying for the cure to malaria, and his name was Dr. Paul Ehrlich. And so he sat down and he had all these different remedies that he wanted to test. So he needed to stain the cells so that when he added the remedy, he could observe what would happen and observe the death of the malaria. Actually, malaria is carried by a parasite. When he added the methylene blue, he observed that, wow, I have my remedy. I need to look no further. This was the first medical indication for methylene blue, was to treat malaria, and it worked really, really well. And of course, when antibiotics came on, they were the new. This happens in medicine quite a bit. When we have new things, that the doctors get excited because they get bored of things just like anybody would, right? When antibiotics came along, methylene blue became less sexy, and what we didn't know in the beginning days with antibiotics, they seemed like they would just be the answer to everything, is that we didn't understand our microbiome. And, a medicine that causes more problems than it solves is not a good medicine. Yes, this, in my opinion, was like the COVID vaccine, right? There are a lot of examples of medicines that the side effect profile is worse than actually the reason that you might be taking the medicine.
You know that on Soberhead podcast, I do not recommend any product or protocol I did not personally try. One of the best tools I've found is Prolon's 5-day fasting mimicking diet. It's not just another weight loss kit. It's designed to help reboot your body's own renewal processes. I've noticed that after a 5-day FMD, I feel sharper, lighter, and more energized. You can listen to the detailed interview I did with Walter Longo and learn about fasting mimicking diet. So if you want to give Prolon a try and experience it yourself, use Ayık Kafa 15 code to get 15% discount on your initial order. Back then they only used it for dyeing cells in the petri dishes and genes in the fish tanks. And actually, I read something interesting. They said it's not to clean the fish tanks, it's to clean the fish, actually, the antibacterial purpose. It wasn't just clean the fish tank.
Yeah, it keeps the fish healthy, just like it does for us if we take methylene blue.
So when did it come back to life again? Or when, let's say, you or many people like you started paying attention back to methylene blue?
For malaria in particular, I think there's so many antibiotic resistance to that they started to become more interested to utilize it again. It really just depends on the physician, because at the end of the day, the hospital or the physician can either use it or not use it. And methylene blue's popularity, because it's not patented, there's nobody that really has an interest to promote it. And that, in Turkey, does the pharmaceutical companies advertise on TV or no?
No.
Yeah, this is, I think, the biggest crime in the United States, is that because the pharmaceutical companies, it's like 60% of the media's revenue, they basically own the media.
Sure.
And so this becomes a problem, because when you have situations like what happened with COVID, there's a lot of misinformation or quality information. Like I wanted to educate people about methylene blue and melatonin for COVID, and I don't know about Turkey, but it used to be that we wouldn't talk about these types of things, and now it's fine.
I mean, I was in New York, to be honest with you, at the very beginning of COVID and for another 2 years. So, yeah, nobody was able to talk about anything. Over here in Turkey, I don't think it was banned to talk, but the people were banned to leave the home. So that was worse, I guess.
Yes.
But something that you touched based on, because I was listening to a couple of things, different doses helps to different things, it seems like, in methylene blue, from nootropic effect to antibacterial to, clean mold in the system. Yeah, I mean, like so many things. So how does that work? Like, what's the mechanism?
Good question. So our immune system works with hydrogen peroxide, and in fact, what'll happen is that methylene blue can raise the level of hydrogen peroxide in these microbes, and so it's very synergistic with the way that we naturally fight infections. The best way to approach this is definitely combining. You don't have to combine methylene blue with light, right? In the beginning we talked about how methylene blue, it's brilliantly blue, and so it's reflecting blue, but it's like a sponge, and it's just pulling photons in. And the methylene blue, one of the points we didn't touch on is that it has an affinity for your mitochondria. So it's going to go and accumulate in cells, mitochondria within the cells. And so cells that have higher level of mitochondria, cells like the cells of your nervous system, have a lot more mitochondria because it's more metabolically required, that needs more energy. Once this, the methylene blue gets into the mitochondria, it works very well to enhance the overall energy of the cell, or, your entire body and your vitality by about 30%. And so across the board, most people feel the difference. There's not a lot of supplements you can take where you really feel the difference. And methylene blue, and it's also a mood uplifter, and they did large clinical trials on depression, and they found that it improved mood quite well. And as you had mentioned earlier, that there was a warning. The FDA still maintains this warning of combining SSRIs with methylene blue, because methylene blue does work on the serotonin and those pathways, and it works on depression by actually treating the reason that we get depressed, which is nitric oxide, right? And a certain type of nitric oxide, which is called inducible nitric oxide. And we're not necessarily going to say that nitric oxide's good or it's bad, but instead there's 3 types of nitric oxide, and inducible nitric oxide is a response to infection, right? And so when we have an infection, we swell, so you vasodilate. The body wants to bring in more nutrients and take away the metabolic waste and some of the microbial gunk that starts to accumulate. So that circulation is really important. And then you have a lot of weightlifters that will take it because they want the pump, right? But what you want is inducible nitric oxide, endothelial or neuronal, right? And so the inducible can be good. You want it temporarily, but you don't want it to be elevated chronically. And they discovered that the nitric oxide directly activated depression. And if they would raise it, people would feel more depressed, and if they lowered it, they would feel less depressed, and it was very correlated. And what methylene blue does is it mops up the inducible nitric oxide. It doesn't touch the endothelial and the neuronal. And what's really interesting is that any red light therapy or near infrared saunas and so forth, they work to elevate your endothelial nitric oxide.
I was just going to ask, because I have notes. So it seems like you guys are combining red light therapy and methylene blue, hyperbaric oxygen chamber and methylene blue.
Yes. Yes.
Why is that?
We call that red blue O2.
Oh,
yeah.
That's your book.
And the hyperbaric oxygen elevates the neuronal and the endothelial. And so you get a real synergy where you're elevating all the good nitric oxide and you're keeping the bad nitric oxide down, which is what you want to do.
There was a debate on the stage, actually, that you couldn't make it.
Oh, I heard. I wish I was there.
Yeah, there was a debate on hydrogen, nitric oxide, and methylene blue. And, almost everyone were, I don't want to say against, but they were like, well, if you take too much methylene blue, that would reduce your nitric oxide. And actually, I even heard that, not on that, but from someone kind of very reputable, actually, that would attach itself to glutathione and empty your storage of glutathione almost.
There's another controversial aspect with methylene blue is your microbiome, right? And whether taking methylene blue has a detrimental effect on the microbiome. And that was based on a study that looked at they were looking at rodents, and they were basically putting methylene blue in their drinking water. And so they were drinking nothing but water with methylene blue, which isn't exactly how we consume it. And what they found is that there were some strains of bacteria that went down, and there was some strains of bacteria that went up. And so what's interesting, though, is like a glass of wine probably has more of a detrimental effect of your microbiome than methylene blue could. But if we wanted to really make sure that we're protecting our microbiome, we want to look at the large intestine, and we don't want a lot of methylene blue to get into the large intestine. And so that's why Mitozen, just full disclosure, I have a company that I'm the scientific advisor for. It's called Mitozen. And anyway, we manufacture what I call a bar, which I showed you one.
Yeah, I'm using it actually. It's time to time I'm sharing it on
squares.
My Instagram. Yeah.
So you take it and you put it in the back of your throat, and then you drink something so your mouth doesn't turn blue, and then it fully dissolves in the stomach and absorbs in the stomach. It doesn't get into the small intestine much, and certainly not the large intestine.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that part. It dissolves in the stomach.
There's very, very high absorption with methylene blue. There's some substances, like you had mentioned glutathione before, NAD. Melatonin is another very poorly absorbed orally. And that's one of the reasons that we have manufactured our products in certain ways that enhance absorption, particularly, a number of different products that we have in a suppository that are rectal, where you're bypassing first pass through the liver.
I want to come to melatonin, but I have a couple of questions in the methylene blue. So first of all, I see people with these drops and they put it in the water and stuff. Is it any different than what you have or some other companies has when you mix it with water and drink?
The main thing you really want when choosing methylene blue is you want to make sure that it's a safe pharmaceutical grade. Is really important, and that the testing. So when we purchase ours, it comes with a certificate of authenticity, which they tested it for heavy metals, but we actually send it out again. And like you had mentioned about with the fish tanks, not all methylene blue is produced cleanly, and so one would want to be careful with choosing it and not go to the pet store and get the same stuff that you put in the fish tank. So heavy metals can be in there. There's droppers, right? And so the problem with dropping it and putting it in water and whatnot is that you can be staining your teeth. And if you don't want to look like, you just ate a Smurf, then this other method, like there's capsules as well, but the gel caps. I'm not a fan of those because a lot of times those can make their way into the small intestine, and there can be a little bit of a leaky gut situation. So it could be hard on the small intestines when taken that way. And so again, the dropper or the bar, the way that we make it would be the best. So it just depends on the blue mouth thing.
How about the IV? I see also people are using in clinics, obviously not at home. IV methylene blue. So is this like a very high dose?
Because it absorbs so well orally, one would ask why would a clinic offer it in an IV? And the answer to that is if there was, let's say, a patient that had a infection like Lyme disease or Epstein-Barr virus, or maybe it's an acute like a COVID or something like that, or maybe it was somebody with cancer, or something. Well, so when we give it as an IV, there's going to be a high amount of methylene blue in the blood, right? And so that's called peak plasma. So we raise the level of methylene blue in the blood, and then we utilize laser therapy to the blood. And you had mentioned Dr. Weber. Dr. Weber produces a very nice device they call the Weber needle, and it's actually a little filament that we can put in the catheter, and our blood circulates multiple times, and so we put the red light, they measure it in nanometers, and so the true red, the reddest, is 660 nanometers. And that's the exact frequency that you'd want to utilize whenever working with methylene blue, because that's the sweet spot for it to absorb maximal photons. And so then if you have a high level of methylene blue in the blood and then you irradiate it, one of the other things that we like to use in this IV is gold and silver. I talk about this in my book as well. The book is available on Amazon. It's called Magic Bullet, and we get into all kinds of depth with everything you'd want to know about methylene blue and you're afraid to ask.
I know. I forgot to bring, I have all your books. Actually, I have the eye drops as well. Oh my God, it's burning like hell. I bought that other eye drop.
The Irie?
Yeah. Oh my God. I bought it when I was in Boulder. It's impossible to use it. I feel like I'm blind. But I use the other one every morning, especially in between spring to fall. It's easy. Now it's like there's a snowstorm outside, so it's not easy to sit down.
Ezra, dilute it with some saline until because you want it to burn some, but if it's just too much for you, because the benefit of that burning is it's activating the brain, it calms the nervous system down through the vagus nerve. It can help the eyes, and sometimes that the potency is a bit much for some people.
Let's talk about the doses, because there's a lot of confusion about that as well. So because for high dose you can use for acute trauma, but what is the safe dose, or what is the nootropic effect? Because it should be something like, let's say 45 milligrams should not be for everything that we've been talking, from antipsychotic usage to God knows what. It seems like it's helping to so many things. So I know that you like higher dose than other people, but what's your recommendation for people to use, let's say, on a daily basis, if someone want to use, or can they use on every day?
Yeah, it can be used every day. Some would suggest taking a break periodically to avoid the buildup of the methylene blue. And so I think that's a good idea, maybe every 10 days to even every 3 weeks. I have found it to be a bit different for everybody. I've even had some patients who felt that taking it 3 days on and 2 days off really worked well for them. If they keep taking it every day, they didn't notice quite the boost that they do if they take those more of those breaks. Dosage, it can also vary, depending on the individual and also depending on what the desired effect is. So like if it's an antidepressant, we would want to take a higher amount, a higher dose. The dosing schedule is going to be somewhere between 0.5 milligram to 4 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. Yeah. And usually we're like 2 milligrams per kilogram or less with most of our patients.
I read somewhere that it helps losing weight. How does that work? Such a miracle thing.
Well, anytime you raise your metabolism, right? You're talking about the mitochondria, which is your metabolism.
Okay.
You speed up metabolism, you improve. Even if you were to just look at the mood uplifting aspect, when we have a higher mood, we're more likely to be out and be active. Yeah.
Let's say for some people like me, they have a red light panel at home. You take it right before, or how much you wait until it kind of gets into your bloodstream through your stomach to go in front of your light panel?
Yeah, I would suggest 30, 45 minutes. You can also take it before bed and do your red light in the morning because the half-life's 12 hours. So it's going to be in your system for a while after you take it. So you've got a pretty big window to utilize light therapy once you've taken it.
Okay, but not like, right, you swallow it and then you go in front of the light panel.
No. I mean, if you take it every day at the same time, you're going to pretty much be able to do your red light whenever you want.
Sure. It's also antibacterial, like we discussed. So I've been suggested once by someone, I don't remember, that when I do my flights, and I do travel a fair amount, so that to take before the flight, if it's a long flight, during the flight, depending on the dose, so that, in order not to catch something while flying.
Yes. It can be really helpful for travel. I find that melatonin is also something that's really, really helpful for travel. I find sinus hygiene to be really important in cutting down on something called biofilm. Because anything in the air is going to stick to that kind of mucousy. Biofilm is like a thick, sticky protein. And we make a nasal spray called Glutastat, and it's mostly essential oils. A bit spicy, but that's something I recommend people travel with as well. And then we have an essential oil for the mouth, and essential oils really work on biofilm better than pretty much anything. And when you can kind of cut down on that biofilm, then your immune system and whatever you're using can really keep things clean a lot better.
I have a question for my purpose. To be honest with you, I don't feel the difference when I take it. Because I have a high tolerance on things, because I have a past drug history, that basically I don't feel much of anything about nothing. Like if I take modafinil, I don't feel anything. If I take Methylene Blue, I don't feel anything. So all these things that you're saying, people feel the boost. I'm like, I don't know. So do you think...
You feel caffeine?
Not like, I don't feel it. It's not like, I have the energy. So do you think the dose is not that high for me? Yeah, I mean, I should take more, or to take like a full square and see what's doing?
You can, yeah. I classify people as either a canary or a bull moose. So it sounds to me like you're a bull moose.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's helping, because I take mostly like before going to workout, and I do a really great performance. It's helping probably, but like it doesn't feel like, oh my God, I feel great. It doesn't feel like that. I'm sure it's doing something. I wasn't so sure. So who should not take it? Let's talk about that too. Who should avoid taking Methylene Blue?
There's a gene mutation that can be a problem for people. They should avoid it. Pregnant women should avoid it. It's actually interesting because they've done some studies where there was, things suggesting that it helped with the birth. But most of the research I've seen I would say you definitely would avoid that. Breastfeeding, I think, just erring on the safety. I mean, if the mother or the young child had a need, like if they caught something and you wanted to utilize the Methylene Blue for a short period of time, I probably would use it periodically with infants and children, and not like use it as something where I put them on it for a long period of time. Just doesn't make sense. But again, if there was some real reason to do it, then I would be behind that.
Hold on, I remembered something. You used on a couple of people, on these very famous biohackers, you injected in their penis.
Oh, no, the prostate.
The prostate, okay.
Yeah.
Why was that?
So this is a technique that we call ProstoBlue Zone. And what we discovered, Ezra, is that most men have an infection in the prostate. And this is something that accumulates over time and with age. And that this chronic infection in the prostate is what makes the prostate sensitive to certain androgens, which then makes it swell, right? And then it swells as men get older. And cancer is the consequence of just a really stressful environment at a cellular level for a long enough period of time, then what happens is the cells start using energy not in the mitochondria. It's actually, you could almost say cancer is a mitochondrial problem. And so the cells under so much stress that it then switches making energy from this electron transport chain, like we mentioned before, to what's called fermentation. And this level of making energy is only 10% as efficient as the mitochondria are. And so then you have this very, very low output of energy, and the immune system then becomes more weakened, right? And then you have more promotion of potential infection. And so the prostate's like an independent cavity, right? There's not a lot of circulation. So we do a semen test because the microbes will show up in the semen. So we send patients home or we mail them. You know, anybody there in Europe, if they wanted to do this test, they could order this test through us. We could ship it to them and they collect their semen, and then it tells us not only which microbes are living in the prostate, but also it'll tell us what antibiotics they're sensitive to. And so then what we do is we make a cocktail which includes methylene blue. We take their blood, we spin their blood down, and we put their immune cells in their own immune cells. We usually will use 1 or 2 antibiotics that we find from this report. And under ultrasound, we inject the prostate, and then we inject ozone, and then we irradiate the prostate with red light. We have a special device that we use, and we do a series of 3 of those. We're seeing, you know, some really interesting results with that. It's quite disruptive because it's the second leading cause of cancer in men over 40. And so there's a huge industry for this.
I was thinking when you were saying prostate, I didn't know that it was to prostate that you were doing the injection. And I started right away thinking that so many men that I know that they have prostate cancer. I mean, it's not deadly, but they have.
And it's terrible, right? You get incontinence, you can't get an erection. Yes, I have a lot of friends who have been through that process, and this can be something that would really, especially when done early. We've treated a number of patients with cancer, and we've seen their numbers drop. You know, we test PSA as well, and PSA is as it goes higher, there's an acceptable range that we can see that to go. But then there's levels that get quite high, and this is where they usually will look besides imaging the prostate, right, for cancer and tumors, and then they could biopsy it. And there's something called a Gleason score, right? And so the Gleason score will tell you how aggressive the cancer is. But we've seen these numbers go down with this procedure because, again, you know, my personal beliefs is that all diseases are either an infection or toxicity or both, right? Things just don't happen for no reason, right? And I call it taking care of your doorways, right? Our body has an interaction with the environment, and this, you know, like your mouth, your nasal passage, I would say in men, the prostate, in women, the vagina, the colon, right? The colon, that's another doorway. And it's keeping these doorways clean because as our immune system starts to become lower, we have this endotoxins that can be basically outgassed from these microbes. And then those endotoxins get into our system. I think anybody that really wants to take a deep dive and really blow your mind is start looking at endotoxins as it relates to virtually all diseases, especially neurologic conditions.
I was thinking of that, let's say Alzheimer's disease. It first started, they were looking to the amyloid plaque. Then they started looking like leaky gut, leaky mouth, whatever. Now they're on these endotoxins. They say like it's none of these things. It's just coming from there.
The way that you just kind of mentioned that, it's actually correlated because the leaky mouth or leaky nasal or, you know, the leaky gut or whatnot. So when you have a disruption in the good versus the bad, because there should be some good, right? But it's the bad bacteria that produce these really nasty endotoxins, which they also call lipopolysaccharides, LPS. And the LPS, they're very inflammatory, right? So within the brain, when you have a foreign invader or a microbe, or you have a toxin, like it could be mercury, or you could have like a neurologic infection that could be coming from the mouth, right? Because there's a connection to the brain through the nasal passage in the mouth. Once this is in the brain has an immune reaction where these plaques, these proteins are your immune system, and they go in and they wrap around these substances to wall them off so that they're not reacting, and that's the protective mechanism. And so this is what they've understood, is that, oh, wow, there's this accumulation with Alzheimer's with all these beta amyloid plaques, but the real problem is not the accumulation of the plaques as much as it's the toxic or the infection that's causing the buildup of the plaques. That would be kind of like, let's say that your city trash collectors go on strike, right? Yeah. And we look in our streets and we see there's all this trash, right, accumulating. And we say, there's a trash problem. All the trash accumulates, and then all of a sudden there's an infestation of rats, right? And so that would be like us basically just going after all the rats versus recognizing we need to get our trash people back on track to clean up the trash, right? I mean, it's literally that insane. And this happens in medicine all the time because they want to find a drug or a molecule that they can put people on for life, because that's the business model that was created by Rockefeller and Carnegie back in 1910 with what's called the Flexner Report, right? This is when the business model for medicine and the pharmaceutical industry really came into its existence. And it's an interesting rabbit hole to go into to understand the Flexner Report and what really shifted within medicine. And I think, like anything that happens in the United States, it seems like, most of the world kind of follows suit with that.
Always. Let's jump now into this miracle molecule that you call it the melatonin, because you love that molecule.
I do.
You love it in very, very high doses.
Yes. Well, when you think about melatonin, most people think about this as the darkness molecule, right? The sleep hormone. And this is a very myopic view of melatonin. And in fact, yes, melatonin is stored when light goes through your eyes, and when light hits your eyes, throughout the day, right, you're going to accumulate melatonin in your pineal gland. And the amount of light that hits your eyes is going to determine how much melatonin you accumulate. When you get darkness, when you go to sleep, whatever melatonin you've accumulated from the light is going to then be released. And this is part of how our circadian rhythm is regulated, okay? However, melatonin is actually produced in every cell in your body. And without melatonin, you wouldn't even be able to live a second. That's how important it is. And in fact, it's inside of your mitochondria, right? What's interesting about melatonin is that in the early days, in the 1960s, they first started looking at melatonin, and they started to do some studies on it. And they were finding a hard time seeing the benefit of melatonin until they stressed the laboratory animals. And they found that it was the stressed animals that fared so much better when they had melatonin on board, right? And so I look at this study and I think about the world that we live in today, and I think about, is there a more perfect molecule that we could utilize that could help us to adapt to all of the stressors that we're exposed to? And, I would offer those stressors to be electromagnetic stress. You have mental, emotional stress. You have physical stress. You have microbial stress, right? Your doorways, right? Your microbiome, all these things are stressful. We have stress associated with light pollution that's affecting our circadian rhythm and our sleep, right?
What if you don't go outside? So my question is like when you were saying nowadays, people are spending most of the time inside. They don't go on the beach like you do with the first light of the morning. They don't even walk outside. So they do not accumulate, there's no accumulation of melatonin in your pineal gland then?
Yeah, and so this would be somebody that wouldn't sleep very well at all, but you can supplement melatonin. Yes. So this is something that works really well with our body. But keep in mind, melatonin is only 2.5% absorbed, right, orally. And so this is why we make a liposomal and a suppository. Before we kind of get into that, you had asked me about the high dose of melatonin. And I think a lot of people listening to this, they get excited about it, and then they're going to go to their doctor, and their doctor's going to say, oh, this guy's crazy. He's insane. That's true. I am insane. However, melatonin is very safe to take in high doses. So that's irrelevant. So you're hearing this from a crazy person, a self-proclaimed crazy person. There's no negative feedback loop with melatonin. In other words, when I take it, I don't shut down my own production because the production for you is completely related to the amount of light that hits your eye. So you want to go outside, you want to get some light, right? You want to take off those sunglasses. And if you don't have sun, you should get something like, like these lights. Can you see this light here? Yeah. My friend, Brian Richards, his company's called SaunaSpace, right? Yeah. And so these lights, you can get some that maybe aren't quite as strong as his, that they use for chickens and things like that, and heating foods and things like that. I find these lights to be really beneficial. You can even just get like one of those floor lamps that sit on the floor, and then you can kind of direct it. Sure.
Does it need to be in the red grade?
So these lights put out a very high level, like 40-something% of near infrared. And it looks like a fire, right? So that's why he calls these fire lights. I think that he renamed them. They're very much like a little campfire. Very, very nice and soothing. And I use it for the lighting in my room. I have it in here because this is a room that I'll see patients. You can see I've got a table here that I work on patients in here. And so I'll shine this light on them, and it's very soothing. And then you can see this other light here. This is what's called the MitoLight Palm, and that does both red and near infrared, and you can put that on your body, and very, very therapeutic. There's a lot of different options when you start to kind of go on and look at whether it's Amazon or just doing different searches, a lot of different like red light panels or different devices, but most of them are worthless.
So about this melatonin thing, I took some notes, like the things that it's helping to, first of all, act as a very potent antioxidant, improves immune system, reduce inflammation, decrease headache, helps fight cancer, protect the brain and the memory, help fight depression. Oh my God, it's like so many things. How is everything? Yeah. How is it possible to all these things?
I like to say I practice metabolic medicine, right? And so when I say metabolic, I'm talking about the subject of making energy, right, at a cellular level. The biggest challenge that we all face from having lots of strong energy and vitality is inflammation. Inflammation is what switches, it's called the cell danger response. And this is where we switch from the electron transport chain to fermentation. We had mentioned that earlier, right? It's only 10% of the amount of energy. And so if we think about if we have an infection, and that infection overwhelms the body, and the body then switches its energy, right? And let's say that melatonin prevents that from switching over, right? It prevents that cell danger response. Well, then we're going to have more energy to fight the infection, right? So then that makes sense. Oh, it's good for infection. The other thing that is really important to understand is that the body is a self-healing, self-regulating device, right? There is wisdom beyond our comprehension at a cellular level. And so our bodies can heal. We're designed to heal, and we're designed to maintain a level of health and vitality. And it's when we run out of energy, our body fails to adapt to its environmental stressors, and then we get sick. And so when you have something like methylene blue or melatonin that are working on the core energy pathways, then you start to get these long lists of benefits. And then one will step back and have pause, thinking, how is that possible? Because we don't see that with drugs, right? Yeah. We don't see that with a lot of different remedies. Can't offer that, right? They're very much like, okay, well, this is for a runny nose, or you take this for pain, or you take this for a sore stomach. So this is when you start looking at these two molecules, you start to see these things that almost seem impossible. However, you want to keep in mind that all these things are doing is raising the energy level. The miracle is that it's the body that does the healing and the regulation.
So when you say that you use the suppositories, why is it different as a mechanism than taking it sublingual or swallowing it?
It's called peak plasma. When we understand peak plasma, so that's like a fancy word, right? This is the idea that if I ingest something orally, then peak plasma would be, there's a certain amount of time before that substance is going to be in my bloodstream, and there's going to be a certain amount of time that it's going to stay in my bloodstream, and then it's not, right? And so most substances that are taken orally, they're in your bloodstream within 10, 15 minutes, and then it's about an hour that you have peak plasma, right? If you take something through a suppository, it's a very slow release. And so not only are you bypassing the digestive enzymes that are very stressful on the substances, but also first pass through the liver that really breaks down a lot of nutrients, and they don't survive that. And so then there's not much that's left in your blood. And so besides having more absorption, kind of like in line with how an IV would react, going straight into the blood, you also have a slow release over 5 to 7 hours. That gives the opportunity for these substances to be absorbed at a cellular level.
So it's not like taking 100 milligram.
Well, the dose, it's not...
Meaning like swallowing or taking through the mouth orally 100 milligram when you take it suppository. It's not like right away getting into your system and it's a huge dump. It's more like a slow release.
Yeah, let's say you wanted to go to sleep right away, right? Like we have a bar, it's similar to the methylene blue. And we put some CBN, which is a cannabinoid that's really good for sleep, along with that. But this bar you take orally and you'll be like ready to go to bed in maybe 15, 20 minutes. If you take the melatonin, the Sandman suppository, you're probably looking at 45 minutes to an hour before it's really starting to work. The good news is that if you'll stay asleep better with the suppository, right?
It stays in your system.
It's available, which is more in lines with when we sleep and the way that the brain and the body releases the melatonin. It's slow, it's through 6, 7, 8 hours. Yeah.
How many milligrams these Sandmans?
Well, we have one that's 200 and we have one that's 400.
No morning effect like grogginess or sleepiness?
That's a great question. There are some people that have a gene pathway that it's the same gene pathway for caffeine. And if you're one that takes caffeine and you're like super hyper and jittery and it's like, oh my gosh, I don't take as much as most people take. I don't even want to drink a full cup of coffee. And then, man, if I have coffee in the morning, I can't sleep that night. You don't get it out of your system. This is about, I'd say like 20 or 30% of the population has this gene mutation. So when we take melatonin, it's the same detox pathway as caffeine and melatonin are. If you take it and then you wake up in the morning and you're still really groggy, basically the melatonin's still in your system, it hasn't cleared, then we recommend people take it earlier so that by the time they wake up, it's cleared, because most people can take melatonin and not be like, oh, I have to go to sleep if there's light in your eyes. So if you're awake, and you have dinner, you might be with some friends, the lights are on, and then when you go home, you get into bed, you turn the lights on, you're ready to go. Well, you could probably take your melatonin sometime before dinner and be fine. Some people are going to be a little bit too groggy and they can't do that, but most patients can. You take it earlier.
I don't even know why I didn't purchase that and try, because someone like me who's like having a horrible sleep disturbance and they couldn't find anything. I did a whole sleep study, like, oh my God, like everything and anything from the ring, medical grade ring, to sticking some electrodes around me. They just couldn't find nothing. So I'm coming to Austin, actually. I think I'm going to order before I land there to receive some, so that at least I can help myself for this jet lag. So it's going to be much easier for me to just stay asleep.
Yes, I think this could be really helpful for you.
Yeah, it seems like, because the way that you explain is like, because it's a longer release time, that's keeping you in bed or asleep much longer. How is it helping with cancer? I know that there are some studies on women who are flight attendants and night shift nurses.
Yes.
They experience more breast cancer than regular daytime workers.
Yeah.
They kind of correlate that with the lack of melatonin as well.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of cancers have been shown in research to be inhibited by melatonin. And in fact, they've looked at chemotherapy and radiation therapy with melatonin and combined together, and there seems to be such a benefit to taking melatonin, and higher doses of melatonin, in fact, like we've been talking about. The subset of cancer that is just like an absolute no-brainer is any cancer that is modulated by estrogen, okay? And so this is your breast cancer, this is your prostate cancer, right? These two, the research is just so overwhelming that I think it's malpractice that our cancer doctors don't have patients on these super physiological doses of melatonin. It's just crazy to me. In fact, they dissuade them. It's very common when we'll start working with cancer patients that it doesn't matter what the recommendation is. They go to their doctor and their doctor says, you don't do anything except just this chemo, because they're trying to stay in a really narrow, with the least amount of variables, right? And this is the scientific approach, right? Is that the science is that it's very, very measured, right? And this kind of goes all the way back to the Flexner report back in 1910. Is they came along and they said, well, wow, look at this, because back then it was the Wild West. You had chiropractors and naturopaths and homeopaths and herbologists, and there was no research on any of that stuff, These people were doing what they found to work, right? And Dale Carnegie and Rockefeller came along and they said, well, this really needs to be revamped completely, right? And it was based on this report that Flexner created. And this was where they launched the pharmaceutical industry. And the way that they did it is that they created a foundation and they were supporting only colleges where the study and the curriculum included only pharmaceutical. They had to take out anything that had anything to do with any natural remedies. So all these doctors learned about was they didn't learn about diet, they didn't learn about exercise, they didn't learn about any of these things. And this is true today with our medical schools. I mean, I think there's like one class of diet that a lot of our medical doctors get, and people are onto this now. I mean, we have like over 100 years that's happened since that, and there still isn't a full integration into, even though a lot of these natural approaches, like what we're talking about, are really more natural approaches to health and well-being. They're not patentable. It's not the money machine that Rockefeller really wanted.
Recently, someone that I know, a young man, had the second time it repeated a testicle cancer. He got operated and they removed them. And I sent this young guy to an incredible professor in the capital. And she believes in healing most illnesses with nutrition. And she recommended melatonin to him. She says, like, even though most researchers are on women, yet it's kind of the reproductive system in a way. So she prescribed to him the highest dose that they can find in Turkey. And she said the same exact thing that you said. Probably his doctor is not going to like it, but we know that it's going to help.
But, you know, they put themselves in a silo, right, in their own world. And, you know, natural medicine was like siloed in their own world. Medical and pharmaceutical, that really hasn't changed. And again, it's all as a result of, say, making medicine and healthcare like a business. And I'm really excited about where we're at here in the United States and how we might be able to like set a new standard,
hopefully,
and inspire a whole new way of healthcare.
So what are the dosage about this list that I said, the reduce inflammation, decrease headache, yada, yada. There's so many beautiful things that melatonin is doing. Like a standard dose, whether it's 200, 400, 100, 5, I don't know. Is there a special recommendation that you give to people?
Usually we'll start them off at 200 milligrams and like maybe for the first day, they might do 100, you know, for a couple of days or a week. And then most people are actually fine going straight to the 200. Most people tolerate it really well. When we have patients that have cancer or they have significant neurological conditions like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, then we'll actually hope that they can tolerate taking melatonin during the day. And we keep them on melatonin 24/7. And so that's why we have that, like something called the Sandman Soul, which is meant to take daytime.
I was just going to ask that because, you know, even though it's not only for sleep to be a remedy to all these stuff, people also take it at night.
Oh, for sure. Yes. When you take it, you can go into very, very nice sleep.
So all these stuff that I said, from cancer to reducing inflammation, decrease headache, and everything and anything around that, it helps by people only taking it at night. So there's no any daytime dosing.
That's what I was suggesting, is that when we have patients here in the clinic that have cancer or they have some neurological conditions, there's other scenarios where we might have people taking melatonin 24/7. You know, this would be when we're trying to mitigate disease, right? This is not about optimizing sleep for this individual. This has to do with this whole conversation about the mitochondria, right? And keeping that protection, you know, going throughout the day and the night.
Do you get used to it? So when you start taking in the daytime, do you kind of get used to it so you're no longer sleepy?
Yeah, 20% of the population will have no problem taking melatonin during the day. You know, 20% of the population is going to be quite groggy if they take it, and they're not going to be able to tolerate taking it 24/7. So it would just be something that you would experiment with and to see how it works for you.
Isn't it blocked by going in daylight, sunlight getting into your eyes? Suddenly the production stops. So that doesn't happen with taking it from outside, I guess.
Not at all. No, it's independent. And this is the misinformation that a lot of people have gotten with melatonin, is that there's no negative feedback loop. So for instance, if we were to take testosterone, we would stop producing our own testosterone. If we take thyroid medicine, we stop producing as much growth hormone. You know, you just down the line, insulin, all these different hormones. And that's the way that we're designed. This is the way our body self-regulates itself. Melatonin doesn't have that self-regulating effect. And so when you combine that with the idea that there's no toxicity to melatonin, if you hear the word toxic and melatonin, that's misinformation. They did a study where it would be like giving somebody 150,000 milligrams of melatonin.
Wow.
And they stopped the study. And almost all the cancer studies, you know, the conclusion was it was well tolerated. There doesn't seem to be any negative side effects to the melatonin, and that further research was recommended. But then further research, because a lot of these are phase 1, you know, these companies, you know, you can't patent melatonin, unfortunately. Oh, a pharmaceutical company would love to patent melatonin, and they've tried. Change the molecule just a little bit here, just a little bit there, but it doesn't work the same. It doesn't work at all, really. It has to be exactly the molecule of melatonin.
Well, that was a great conversation. John, thank you so much. Finally, we were able to make it. First of all, I'm very grateful that we were able to help people not to be afraid of these two incredible molecules. You were very straightforward saying like, this is the best two things after bread and butter came to this planet Earth. Yeah. But it is actually, and it gives me another courage to use them more. I'm going to be obviously adding all your links to the show notes. I have your books. I wish that I would bring it with me, but last time I brought, this time I forgot. Last time it was just like at the very last minute that they canceled and I took it back home. But I will definitely share them on my social media, and I really hope to be able to see you maybe in Austin.
Yes, that sounds great. The Health Optimization Summit.
Yeah, and if you don't, then I'm sure you'll be in some other things.
I sure will. Yes. Well, Ezra, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. It was a great interview.
Thank you so much.
If people want more, I'm on Instagram at Dr. John Lieurance.
Yeah, your mitozen.com. Is it mitozen.com or org?
Mitozen.club.
.club.
You can go to the .com, but we don't have the full line of products. The club, it's a $10 lifetime membership fee. Plus, we have like a lot of educational material. So if you like this conversation, we have a lot of those types of conversations there.
I mean, to be honest with you, there are so many Turks living in Florida area, and they should definitely come visit the clinic because you guys are offering so many things. So many.
Yes.
But we're going to add all of these to the show notes, everything about you. Don't worry. And thank you so much for making time. And I am hoping to see you soon in great health.
Excellent. All right.
Thank you.